to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your hosts, Buddy Sotello Esquire, Evan Ginzburg, and Dr. Mike. So, a little bit of a technical issues before we got online, but starting a few minutes late here on the West Coast, even later on the East Coast. But what a weekend of a lot of events and a lot of things transpiring. Whether it's football or whether it's celebrities dying, it's quite a weekend. Mike, you want to go over what some things we want to talk about today?
Well, I want to do two quick plugs and then pitch to Evan. And tonight will be different because every time we ask a question or start a topic, we're going to have Evan, who didn't get to talk a lot last week, be the first guy to start. First, as always, or usually, I want to plug Big Time Memories, that weekly documentary series on Detroit. Dave Brzezinski and the Sheik's ring announcer, Terry Sullivan. And Terry did a lot of other great things. But this is season 3, and they actually went to the Sheik's house, his gravesite. Free documentaries. Just go to YouTube, but go look for Big Time Memories, because that promotion was called Big Time Wrestling. The Sheik stole that name from promoter Roy Shire, my boss, my secondary territory, San Francisco. But also, and I do want to plug Guillermo del Toro's movie Nightmare Alley. We'll talk about that later. I want to see if Evan has seen it. Up for a bunch of Academy Awards, I'm sure. But the coolest thing about it is it's like a carny freak show. So anybody that loves wrestling, loves the arts, I know. Well, I'll ask Evan about that. And speaking of Evan, I want to put him over because Evan, who I've known for decades, has done everything there is to do in show business and every aspect of it: music, documentaries, film. I mean, The Wrestler, the movie with Mickey Rourke, one of the greatest things ever. All thanks to Evan's hard work.
He's watched a bunch of movies too.
Yes, but Evan stays
I've watched a lot of movies.
And I'm proud to have called him a friend all these years. I mean, with wrestling then and now, I was lucky enough to be one of his regular columnists and photographers. But Evan's done everything and done it with class.
Thank you for my eulogy, Mike. I appreciate it. It's good to hear it while I'm here.
When you emailed me earlier today, I go, I haven't praised Evan in many, many years. And even Russ is standing up, to people online. We were talking about the kind of amazing weekend of football. I guess maybe we can start with that. I don't know, Ev, did you watch either Russ, our team, between Russ and I, San Francisco 49ers, defeat the it was amazing too, that game. And then today the Rams defeating and sending Tom Brady possibly into retirement. And then Russ got into it online over cheater, as my wife calls him, Tom Brady. And then the other COVID moron, well, I don't know about Brady's status, but Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully the two of those bums retire out of here, because I don't like Tom Brady because he's messing with Joe Montana's records. Ever, did you watch any of the great football this weekend?
I didn't watch 1 minute the entire season. I have no interest. I was watching Shark Tank.
Well, at least he's honest. Wait, you're not watching the Bachelorette or any of those great shows?
I don't watch any reality shows. The only show I watch regularly is This Is Us. It's like a comedy. It's like a comedy here. My wife just looks over, and inevitably I'm just sitting there crying, watching This Is Us.
Yeah. Back to Guillermo del Toro, one of the great genius. Art. This film is art. Have you seen it yet? If not,
no, I didn't see it yet. I've seen a bunch of his films, and The Shape of Water is one of my all-time favorite films.
Won the Oscar.
Yeah, I mean. And some of his Spanish language films are tremendous also. I mean, the guy's brilliant, and he's not shy to do commercial projects as well, and he puts his imprint on it. It's not schlock. I mean, the guy, he's one of the greatest living directors. He's had multiple masterpieces. And, I got nothing but respect for him.
He's a horror fan too. He put out.
Yeah.
He loves horror. He
did Hellboy, Kronos.
Yeah, and Pan's Labyrinth.
Pan's Labyrinth is one of his masterpieces. It's tremendous.
but they're speaking Carney in the movie. You're gonna love it.
Okay, I got to see
That
it.
is lost art. Every time we bring on some old timer, and I'm wrangling for Jeff Jarrett, who's an old friend of mine, and I've done a lot of favors for. When he was in TNA, he would constantly ask for photos I took of him and Owen Hart. So I'm trying to get Jeff Jarrett. I think we'd have a great hour.
I would love to talk to Jeff Jarrett.
So that's on the horizon for this year.
Speaking of old school movies, I saw Night in the City, and that's also a wrestling related film. Richard Widmark is unbelievable. He's like manic and sweaty and desperate, and and he's running like a caged rat. I mean, the guy's amazing in that. And what is he in the movie? He's a wrestling promoter. And there's the original Zabisco. The original Zabisco's in there. So
I've watched it twice in the past 6 months on Turner Classic. It comes on pretty often.
Yeah, it's great. Mike Mazurki's in it. It's man, it's a great film noir, and there's a real wrestling theme to it. I wouldn't call it a wrestling movie. He just kind of falls into it in one of his like desperate schemes. But there's a sequence in there where Zabisco's wrestling Mike Mazurki. It's rough.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Also,
there's no fans. The first time, from what I recall, it's been a while, but there's like no fans, and it's pretty brutal. It's like a shoot.
Yeah. And the point was that Zabisco, pronounce his first name for me, Stanislaw?
Yeah, Stanislaus.
Stanislaus, he used the term Greco-Roman. In other words, he's the pure wrestler, and the other guys are like, to him that's Hulkamania, and he doesn't like the change. Yeah, it's interesting.
And then you also said you saw the Vampiro documentary.
Vampiro.
Vampiro.
No, Vampiro. Ian Hodgkinson, who was supposed to make of our St. Louis 1992 convention. I can't remember if he showed up or not at the last minute.
I saw Vampiro live in Mexico, and he was a big star, and he's got all kinds of concussions and memory loss, and the documentary is really great. And he he's really having a tough time of it. He's 50-ish now, and he had
a talk show on Roberto Rodriguez's El Rey network after Lucha Underground was a mess. The third season didn't happen, or it did, and then everybody was kind of held in limbo. But then Rodriguez gave him a weekly talk show, and he primarily interviewed casting directors of all Hispanic films, and he kind of focused on female Latina directors and showbiz people. And he had about 13 episodes, and then Rodriguez, I guess, was told to pull the plug on El Rey Network, sadly, which was a great guys network, or for women that love action stuff.
Yeah, that's a shame.
There's a genius there. Rodriguez, I think, is a genius too for offbeat. I wouldn't really call them underground films, but
Grindhouse.
Yeah, Grindhouse.
Yeah, Rodriguez and Tarantino are basically our peers age-wise, and they grew up on the same stuff that I did. Like I was just watching The Return of Ringo, a spaghetti western, Guillermo Gemma, and it's really an artfully done film. It's a dark film and a lot of action, and the guy's like brooding, and the Mexican bandit stole his wife and his business and his money and the town, and it's not just like he's not like Superman where he's just like the fastest gun in the West. It's a serious movie, The Return of Ringo, and interestingly enough, it sounds like a sequel. The first one was a pistol for Ringo, but basically what they did was kind of like Back to the Future, where they just shot them back to back, and it's the same actors playing different characters. It's not even technically a sequel. You know, in the second movie, the guy's name isn't even Ringo. You know, this was just for marketing purposes. But it's funny watching these back to back because you're going, wait a second, that guy was the dad in the last movie. Now he's the bad guy in this movie. You know, and
it's like John Waters films where he used pretty much the same crop in his 70s phase. So like
Woody Allen used to do that, the same actors.
Yeah. But John Waters, it's weird because he'll have Divine and Pink Flamingos have sex with what's his name, David Pierce, the guy with the blue hair, and then and they're at odds, you know, because the David Pierce guy is raping Divine, a male transvestite. But in the next movie or the prior movie, they're best friends, and so it was kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, yeah.
They all look, you know, the same, whether it's multiple maniacs or.
Well, it was mind-blowing sitting in the theaters back in the day for the midnight shows, and this dog takes a legitimate dump in the street, and Divine eats the turd. I mean, for real. I mean, the camera didn't stop. Divine eats the turd. And every single person in the theater goes, oh, my God. Everybody's trying not to puke.
Well, that was intention. Yeah, that was intention to put that on that. You know, all of those people, from many of them long since deceased, like Edith Massey, Edith the Egg Lady. I ended up interviewing most.
Dating her.
Pardon?
Dating her.
No, but
No.
I got to meet an interviewer. She came to San Francisco. Russ will remember there used to be 3 Stone music venues. There was one in like Palo Alto, you know, by Stanford. There was one in Berkeley, and then there was one on Broadway Street, the Stone. So Edith Massey, Edie the Egg Lady, and her band was called The Evidence. They were punk rockers, and she would just do, she knew nothing about that music, but she would stand up there in fishnets with her boobs hanging out and just sort of talk her way through these songs. So I got to shoot, you know, press for that, and then interview her after. Divine, a ton of times, she came to San Francisco in the 70s until she died, in full gear, drag, for the Exotic Erotic Ball, and I had a photo shoot with her, just one-on-one with him. His real name was Scott Glenstead or Glenn something or other.
His real name was Russell
Mink Stoll, met her. And then John Waters, the first time I met him, I see him give a lecture at the Castro Theater. Russ knows where that is, you know, on his filmmaking and blah, blah, blah. And then he broke a tooth in the middle of it and asked if anybody's a dentist. I'm not, you know, I'm still living in Baltimore. I haven't moved out yet to my new home in San Francisco. Anyway, I ended up doing an emergency the next day on John Waters on a Sunday. And
I want to remind Mike of something. He probably doesn't remember this. When we were doing Legends Radio, it wasn't a wrestling show. We had tons of wrestlers, but we had tons of actors, singers, you know, TV stars, etc., so on. So we asked John Waters to do the show, and he goes, nah, I'm not into that wrestling. So the guy had a movie where a transvestite ate a dog turd, but he wouldn't do anything wrestling related. This is where wrestling stands in our culture. Can you imagine? Do you remember that, Mike?
Yeah, because I kept asking his agent. He would bop back and forth. He'd spend the summers, like in spring and fall in Baltimore, but he had his San Francisco place near, you know, he had made it by that point, near where
that show was just audio. He could have done that on the moon.
Yeah.
You know?
But I would go to this stuff. Now, they shut this record label down. It was fairly new, like a punky record label, Burger, out of LA. But for about 6 years in a row, they put on a massive free show in Oakland in a park called Burger Boogaloo, and every year he was the MC. So I would go, I would be backstage yakking with him, you know, begging him to do the show. And I think he just wanted to do his own thing and didn't want to be bothered. But I mean, I said, will you pose with Devo? I had him pose with Devo, and Fred Armisen, one of the Devo members, passed, I guess the drummer. And so Fred Armisen played with them the one time they were there that year as the headliner. And you know, he posed with everybody I asked him to do. He just wouldn't do the frickin' radio show.
But I don't know if you remember this. When they actually told us the reason why he didn't do the show. He mentioned it was about wrestling. He didn't want to lower his standards to do something that involved wrestling. But some of those films had hardcore sex, which I'm fine with. But when you eat a dog turd and you won't do wrestling, it says something.
He mellowed out when he got more mellow around 1980, and then he did Hairspray, which was Divine's last movie. Divine didn't even get to go to the premiere and passed.
I love Divine. Divine was awesome.
Oh, a character. You remember from Desperate Living? Was that the one where she gets acid thrown in her face and her face looks like...
It's all a blur. It was always like they were like in a trailer.
She had two classic lines.
Yeah, I mean, whoever watched any John Waters movie sober, that was not the point. If you're watching a John Waters movie and it wasn't like the last of an all night like movie marathon and you're already pretty much wasted by the time that
we used to see it in the theater at midnight. Everybody was wasted.
Exactly.
So his publicist sent me a box set. I wanted the Diane Linkletter story. Do you remember Art Linkletter had a daughter?
Yeah, the daughter killed herself.
Killed herself, but John did a whole movie on that, and he has her jump out the window. So he has this guy with long hair playing Art Linkletter. And he really, and Art Linkletter really wanted to sue. He was so disgusted that this guy did this.
But wrestling was beneath him.
Two classic lines from
Wrestling's getting beneath me if you turn on WWE.
Female Trouble was the one where Divine goes insane, and she has two classic lines. At Christmas time, when she's a little girl, she gets this tiny little box for a present, and she shakes it, and she looks at her parents in disgust. It's not what she asked for. She goes, a rod and reel? And then as she got older, she kept getting shit that she didn't want for Christmas presents. So she has this Christmas present. She shakes it. She goes, this better be my fucking cha-cha heels. It's tiny. It's like a ring box, so there's no way it could be shoes. It just is so. The delivery by Divine was so classic on some of these things. And then by the time she did Hairspray, it was a mainstream movie. He started getting Patty Hearst and what's her face, Turner, the one that was in all of the
Kathleen Turner.
Yeah, Kathleen Turner, whose voice now she sounds like a dude.
Tab Hunter.
Yeah, she was in. Yeah, so
Tab Hunter was in his movies also.
Who?
Tab Hunter.
Yeah. He was in both. Is it Polyester? Yeah, Polyester that was in Smell-O-Vision. You had a card where you scratched all these horrific smells like BO and farts. And then he was in Lust in the Dust also with Divine as the love interest. And, that's when we all figured, okay, Tab Hunter's gay. He was, the love interest for Divine in Polyester, and then Lust in the Dust, which was a goofy Western where Divine plays a cantina female bartendress.
Yeah.
Tab Hunter, who's a cowboy, the sheriff. It's insane. So let's move into the deaths, and I'm going to pitch to Evan because there was...
that is one of our favorite topics on this show.
Well, we've lost so many, as Cher eloquently put the other day. She goes, is it just me or every other day we're losing these amazing artists? But there was a blaxploitation famous actor, Ev, and I can't find my obit clip on him, but he was in...
Max Julian just died. Max Julian.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah. He did tons of those movies. He did a great movie, Thomasine and Bushrod. It was like Bonnie and Clyde. Right. And I believe he financed it himself. So a lot of those guys were independent filmmakers, and Gordon Parks. A lot of those guys. I mean, Fred Williamson did his own deals back in the day. He basically Fred Williamson would say, I get the girl, I don't die at the end. And they were all pretty like variations on a theme, and he'd go kick ass,
That guy, Eddie Murphy, did that movie, Something Dynamite. I never knew of that guy. You probably did, and I go, wow, I want to know the backstory.
Rudy Ray Moore, Dolomite.
Yeah,
Rudy Ray Moore was great. Dolomite, he did several movies, the same character, and it was basically indie filmmaking. And he was like a fat guy that did kung fu, and the kung fu was awful. It was campy.
But he was like the the world's worst filmmaker. What was that guy's name? That
No. It was fun. I mean,
no. But I'm saying it was in the reviewers that I read, like in the L.A. Times, said he was like in Ed Wood in that he would do a take, it'd be shitty, and he'd go, okay, we'll move on. He wouldn't scrutinize his own work, and so some of the stuff looked bad. Like you're saying, the karate looked pretty awful.
Yeah, some of the fights were god awful, but you'd never mistake him for Bruce Lee. But the guy had charisma, and he was a great talker. Great talker, great. He was a rapper, early rapper, and he was also a singer in real life.
Yeah.
So I saw him perform.
So we lost Paris of the Harmony Group, 5 Satins, and we also lost Fred Paris and Rosa Lee Hawkins of the Dixie Cups, 60s classic female 3-part band.
Yeah, going to the chapel. Yeah. So the wrestling fans who tuned in are basically pounding their head against the wall going, these guys aren't talking about wrestling. So.
Hey, we are going to talk about a guy eventually that I can't recommend highly enough from Montreal. Impact just brought in Speedball Mike Bailey. This guy is incredible. And, Ev wrote this masterful piece on wrestling at Madison Square Garden. I asked him if he
out this week, Pro Wrestling Stories.
But this is a guy who reminded me, Evan and I were talking about the Madison Square Garden Dynamite Kid Tiger Mask Satoru Sayama match. This guy is doing breathtaking things I've never seen before, and I never heard of the guy. And he just debuted on Impact, which is having all the Ring of Honor guys do an invasion angle. That is the show to watch now. It's besides AEW, which I don't miss. I don't fast forward through that. I got to watch all of these damn shows. So I do fast forward through anything from WWE now, especially NXT, which they've ruined.
So what? When you say you have to, you're writing a column about all of this?
Yeah, I do for Japan, for both the online version of Shukan Pro and then the newspapers that still cover pro wrestling. I have to watch the shows, but I fast forward to the good parts. I kind of, I do it at the slow mode. So I'll go to the promos, I'll listen to all the promos. And, if it's a match that bores me, really these new kids on NXT completely blow for the most part, other than Rick Steiner's son, who's, like one of those big muscle head guys that I'm not in favor of. I like the fact that the 3 senior people on Impact are all TNA guys. Whether it's the Dexter Loomis character, who is Sam Shaw, or Eli Drake, and
Eli Drake's from out here, right?
Yeah, he's a Vegas guy, but when I met him the first time, he told me he roomed with, when they were breaking in with Les Thatcher, who Evan and I have interviewed a zillion times. He trained the both of them in Ohio. He was rooming with John Moxley, and they were the best of friends. And then they came, Mox, for some reason, because he and Renee Young living in Vegas. He just came to see his pal, and backstage, I got to pose Moxley with Eli Drake, now known as LA Knight. Here's something, because Evan, you guys have watched him do that. He was the first to do the thing with a 3-syllable name and do his finger. And why hasn't anybody written, and if not, I'm going to do it, on Britt Baker, who is not the first dentist in wrestling, I was, but she's copied that thing. Now, obviously, she does a much better job, but one could argue, why is Eli Drake, why hasn't he sued for, some kind of gimmick infringement? Because he was doing it, do, and now she's doing it with DMD. Eli Drake, and they didn't want to use that name. They wanted to trademark, so he had to come up with a 3-syllable name, LA Knight, which makes no sense. I don't know why you would have a first name of LA, but whatever. And that's L period A period Knight, which is bizarre. But you guys have noticed that, right? I mean, Britt Baker is doing the DMD with the hand gestures, exactly ripping off LA Knight, Eli Drake. Comments?
I remember Frank Gotch doing that early on at the birth of pro wrestling, before his legendary TLC match with Hackenschmidt. Now, I really haven't watched much of Impact.
You might want to now because the Ring of Honor dudes are on at every show now. They destroyed D'Lo Brown to where I think they've taken him off commentary. He was doing color.
That helps.
They fired. I'm not sure where they fired our friend Matt Stryker, who was doing play-by-play. They got rid of him and they replaced him with Tom, whatever his name is. That used to be bop back and forth between Raw and SmackDown. As the lead announcer, and they got rid of him in one of those mass ridiculous firings. And
so my big question would be, you have these quote unquote name indie stars who kind of float from one promotion to another. Are they making a living at this stage of the game?
What's his face? The guy that's married to Chelsea Green, I can't think of his real name or what his name was in the Jersey guy. He WWE let him go, and then he went to Impact almost immediately. But he's going to GCW, where he came in, instantly became the top heel. They view him as a WWE guy going against Nick Gage. I can't think of his name right now. He's the one that's like the king of action figures. But he said. He was on Busted Open the other day again. He's on every month. And he said he's making more money than he was when he was just, stuck in that WWE contract. Because he's working Impact. He's done some NWA. He did an appearance on AEW. And
I'm happy to hear that. If these guys, they'll have more freedom if they could, be stars in multiple indie groups and,
And it's nice to hear that the WWE isn't the only form of employment that wrestlers can get and still be, self-sustaining, or not have a day job.
Yeah, he said, and his wife said too, they have not only creative control over their characters and input and storylines and stuff where they did not have any in WWE, but they're making more money than they did in WWE.
Perfect.
At the time of their lives.
Probably wrestling more matches,
I hear that some are. Keith Lee and his wife haven't wrestled. Killer Cross, or it was called Karrion Kross in NXT, and then they brought him up and completely botched, put him in an S&M outfit, Vince did, and then let him go, he and his wife, which was kind of horrific for them, but they are getting all of this work, and supposedly he can start working for other groups. We're assuming he's going to go into Impact or AEW. Actually, he left Impact on bad terms when he refused to blade in some match. I forget who it was with, Austin Aries or somebody. But let's get back to the deaths. We lost Peter Bogdanovich, and of course this week, so I was telling both Russ and Evan, Meatloaf, his very first thing, I'll be really brief, about 1973 when the Roxy Theater on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles opened, the opening event brought over by Jack Nicholson and his manager, business partner, who's a famous director and producer, whose name escapes me. They brought it in from England, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was Meatloaf's very first gig. He wasn't in the original London cast, came to LA. I was there opening preview night and saw him do his biker thing and blown away by his singing. And then he, of course, then went on to New York, and they went to Broadway or off Broadway with that. But it had Tim Curry. I mean, it had all of the good people. In many ways, the music and singing was better because the opening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show film, which I also would go to opening night at the New Art Theater on Santa Monica in L.A., the lips at the beginning that are singing, that's actually Magenta, the female with the long hair, the purple long hair monster character in that film. It's too slow. The play, it's rat-a-tat-tat. It's really fast, rock type song, and way better. So if you get a chance, can listen on Pandora or something to the cast play version. But that was Meatloaf's first. Shot him in a couple of Once Bad Out of Hell came out, shot him. Disappointed. You know what they're saying now? Allegedly, he died of COVID. Allegedly, and he had said he was a extreme anti-vaxxer, anti-mask. And his direct quote was, if I get it because I'm not going to mask or vax and die, so I die. And said,
he fucked up.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
You need the wrestling connection in here.
Let's sort of you guys to talk about him, because he was a normal guy and very liberal like Dennis Miller in the 70s, 80s. I don't know what happens to these guys, when they hit 50, but he was a great entertainer. He was,
there isn't a karaoke machine in the world that doesn't have Paradise by the Dashboard Lights that's been done 150,000 times on its counter. Everyone right towards the end of the night when everyone's super drunk, that's the song they want to sing.
Well, my experience with Meatloaf was I was always an R&B, blues, and jazz guy, but he just so happened to be playing my college when I was a student. And, they were hyping the show, and it was dirt cheap. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go check it out. Why not? And the guy was tremendous. He just blew everybody away. I mean, this was like, I go see James Brown, Al Green, Marvin Gaye, Bobby Womack, in the 70s. So I didn't know what to expect from some big fat guy named Meatloaf. And the guy was amazing. He was just an amazing live performer.
He did cartwheels like Belushi on TV as the Blues Brothers before he did the cartwheels in the movie. So Meatloaf would do an occasional cartwheel at some of the concerts I shot, and I have pictures of it.
Yeah, so James Brown's knees would bleed from the splits during his show, and Meatloaf would stagger off stage and need oxygen after the show. This is how hard these guys work. So if I'm mentioning Meatloaf in the same breath as James Brown, this is how great a performer that guy was. And I saw him I even saw him headline Madison Square Garden when I believe Bat Out of Hell 2 came out. He did 3 or 4 of those, but
it's like each song was like
an opera, a rock opera,
and he acted it out with the female lead, and they
great.
It was the Tubes did that, a decade before that in the early 70s, before Fee Waybill got on MTV and sold out. But it was like each thing was like this little mini play or operetta. It was something.
The other band that did something comparable was Kid Creole and the Coconuts. They did Fresh Fruit in Foreign Places, which originally Joseph Papp produced at the Public Theater. It was theatrical. And each song was like a little story, like they were traveling around the world on, Fresh Fruit in Foreign Places, one of the great, great albums, and didn't sell a fraction of what Bat Out of Hell did, but tremendous.
They were on Saturday Night Live. That's how I discovered them. I forget.
Great act. Great.
And they were amazing, too. So go look for Kid Creole and the Coconuts. And then
still around 40 years later. He moved to Europe.
Wow.
Too hip for the room, man. They were big.
Didn't you bring the head guy? You brought him on Legends.
August Darnell. Well, we brought on Cody Mundi, the vibes player.
Okay.
Yeah, like the sidekick. Yeah. So, Kid Creole moved to, I believe, France, and he's been performing for 40 years. And they evolved out of Dr. Bizard's original Savannah band, Cherchez La Femme.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, they were awesome, too.
And his half-brother, Stoney Browder, was the genius behind Dr. Bizard's Savannah band, which was like disco meets big band. They were ahead of their time also. So we used to say too hip for the room. Like they were big in LA, big in New York, big in London. But, in between, they didn't fit any, playlist, it was a tough sell.
There's another one to go look them up because their music incredible. And we are losing these legends. I said it last week when we were talking about Ronnie Spector's death, which was, she had a horrific life, 6 years with Phil Spector, until she was able to escape. And but I think winter and the coldness sometimes is tough. I'm not even talking about COVID, and hopefully, I hope that's not what got Meatloaf, because he was a fantastic entertainer, and he did go toe to toe. It was kind of weird seeing him have to ass kiss and at times go toe to toe with Donald Trump on The Apprentice when he was on that thing. And I think he was paired off a lot with what's the guy's name? He had the motorcycle accident. He played in the Buddy Holly movie. He's kind of nutty now.
Oh, I know.
Big Gary Busey.
Yeah,
Gary Busey. Yeah.
Meatloaf and Gary Busey, if I'm not mistaken, they're like paired up half the time on that season of The Apprentice. And I watched to see what's going to come out of both of their mouths, and what they'll react to Trump. I've told you this story. Only time I was around Trump was at an MMA show that he kind of co-promoted, co-owned. They only did 2 shows, he and Oscar De La Hoya, Affliction, and Brock Lesnar. That was where he made his big debut at an outdoor Coliseum, LA Coliseum thing. So Trump is there. I made sure, because already at that point, that was a good 15, 16 years ago or so. Every ass angle of Trump, I shot his hair. Everything.
Yeah.
The thing I didn't do was get up on a high chair and outwards on it, because I go, this is the most bizarre looking. It looked like a bird's nest on top. And even then, with hairspray and lacquer and all this elaborate stuff, like almost like a turban or something in Arabic culture, it was what he did with the hair to cover. And we would later learn he had the bald spot on the back of his head, a very unusual place to have it. But anybody that's in the WWE Hall of Fame should not be friggin' president. Period.
I'm with that.
So Johnny Valiant had a job interview with Donald Trump to be his security guard. And this was long before he was president, just when he was, a New York businessman 20, 25 years ago. So during the interview, they asked Johnny, they go, would you take a bullet for Mr. Trump? So Johnny's trying not to laugh because, he had a great sense of humor. So he says to me, Evan, quote, he says to me, can you believe they asked me if I would take a bullet for this prick? That's what he said to me. Can you imagine?
What did he answer back?
Say.
I don't know what he answered back. Yeah, I wasn't there, but it's so absurd.
No.
Huh?
He didn't get the job, so he must have said no.
Yeah, I don't know, man. But
so, guys, we also have Louie Anderson to talk about. He was a very funny comedian. I always liked his style. And, he was always self-effacing and, a guy that wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. He had his own cartoon show and Life with Louie. And just, he played a great, fat guy in a lot of different, roles that he had. And I think he touched a lot of people with his comedies. What are you guys' thoughts?
Know what I said? You know what I said about him? I said, when you hit our age, and I'm 103, I'll be 104 in October. What happens is you see these guys, and Mike will verify this because we're both older than Buddy. You see these guys as up and coming stars. They're like climbing that ladder. Like they got on Carson and they were a hit. Next thing you know, you're seeing them more often. Carson brings them back, and all of a sudden the guy's headlining in Vegas or opening for some huge star in Vegas. And all of a sudden the guy's a star. And then what happens? Decades go by and the star starts to wane a little. Then what happens? You start hearing rumors. I hear the guy's ill. And then you hear, doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. His friends are coming to say their goodbyes. And then the guy's gone. And in my head, it's like, like this. But you're talking like a 40-year stretch from the first time you saw the guy to the day you read his obit. And you just go, yeah, oh man, I feel bad. I like that guy. That guy was, brilliant comedian, brilliant actor. He Richard Pryor would eviscerate himself, just rip himself open. And guys like Louie Anderson were willing to do the same. It's not easy to get on a stage and share your pain.
His father was abusive to him.
Yeah,
A lot, just like Pryor, but maybe not to Pryor's level, because Louie Anderson was more mainstream, never swore, but still very, very entertaining and super funny and effacing, like you said, right from his first appearance on The Tonight Show, he was making fun of his weight.
But everything in Hollywood is about looks, youth, Botox, staying young, and here's a guy who's talking about being overweight, talking about, a tough childhood, talking about not getting the girl. This is the opposite of how Hollywood works, and you have to respect somebody that's that honest and willing to do that, and that's what elevates the really great comedians. Anybody could tell a joke. I could tell a stupid joke right now, but to really open yourself up and pour your heart out and make people laugh and say something meaningful. That's what, separates the great comics from the guys,
who are permanently at the ha-ha hut.
Yeah, the guy's waiting till 3 a.m. to do 5 minutes in front of two drunks.
Did you see that heartbreaking photo? Gilbert Gottfried posted a photo. Louie Anderson and Saget standing next to, and they're all taking selfies standing next to Gilbert.
And these things come in threes. Gilbert better hide for a couple.
Yeah.
He doesn't look so healthy. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I remember
Gilbert didn't look good when he was young.
Yeah.
Now he had a big full Jew-fro, if you want to call it that. I'm sorry if I've offended anyone. He debuted on Saturday Night Live, had a big full head of hair, and that's when he started that shtick of like closing his eyes a lot when he was, talking, and the voice and everything. I thought, this is the funniest guy on the planet. That was 1980. They finally shed Lorne Michaels for a year. They shed Belushi and Aykroyd and Gilda and Lorraine Newman and Curtin, and even Bill Murray left, and they brought in a whole new cast, and Gilbert was part of that new cast with guys like Charles Rocket, who got fired after he was the news.
That had Eddie Murphy too. That's where Eddie Murphy got
a little bit later, the year and a half into it, but and Gilbert was already let go.
Joe Piscopo and
Gilbert came in there, and Piscopo I thought was, Murphy was huge star, mega star. But I thought Piscopo was very, very funny. Ev, what's the story with him? He's still doing like stand-up, and he's kind of a shticky guy now.
I haven't seen him in ages.
He's doing all these teeny clubs in the New York area and Long Island and stuff. I thought you might.
The thing with stand-up is it's like a teacher needs to teach, a singer needs to sing. These guys need to stand in front of a crowd and make people laugh. And if they don't, something's missing. I mean, believe me, Seinfeld doesn't need the money. He still does stand-up.
He loves it because he lives and breathes that stuff. I don't think he'll ever retire. A guy
form of therapy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're not making a dime off of this show. This is therapy to me. I vent for an hour, but and go on my merry way. It is what it is. Some people. Mike and I have been doing radio. God, I started doing radio 1991. It's 31 years ago.
Jeez.
So part of you just needs at WBAI with Fred Giabold, 1991.
And that's a perfect segue to the last topic I wanted to bring up tonight, which is that
we're going another 2 hours.
Yes, you too. I'm going to be going to sleep. But 38 years ago on this date was when Hulk Hogan beat the Iron Sheik for the WWF Championship.
30.
How much did that change the history of the world as we know it?
Not the world, but it ruined wrestling.
The world, yes. No, it did change the world. It did change the world. Because it made Hulk Hogan a star.
There's another COVID night. Have you heard when Betty White passed, he already started to spread these rumors and got censored online. Evan, is well aware of other people who've gotten properly censored online, but he was blaming it on her getting the third booster shot, which her manager and family finally said publicly, we're in grief, but we want to correct Hulk Hogan. She never had the booster. She had been quarantined at home since March of 2020, had both shots, but didn't have the booster. So they were really pissed to the point of possibly threatening to sue Hulk Hogan. So yeah, there's how he changed the world. I mean, Lou says, I don't know if he came up with it for that, but he constantly, anytime he talk about Hogan, or Evan and I would have him on, or any other time I'd talk to him, he'd say, yeah, that guy doesn't know a wristwatch from a wrist lock. That famous line. So
I saw videos of Hogan in Japan. He wasn't the worst wrestler ever.
He would do more stuff in Japan. You never see
Dr. D. His fights with Dr. D. David Schultz were intense. Okay, those two guys wound up in the hospital after facing each other because they were that. Schultz hated Hogan, and Hogan didn't like him either.
Cauliflower Alley. Hour and a half, the worst and longest acceptance speech for an honoree, and about 90% of it he trashed Vince the whole hour and a half, hour and 35 minutes.
Schultz?
Yeah, it was fine actually. A lot of people loved it. That was 2019 before COVID, and he went on and on, beating Bob Geigel's Borefest record for an acceptance speech. At least Schultz was kind of entertaining, but he had earlier done a seminar for an hour and a half and trashed Vince the majority of that time too.
But it's about Hulk Hogan. I mean, with him winning the title over the Iron Sheik changed the fate and direction of the WWF. Kind of built in that rock and roll, the what was soon to be the rock and wrestling connection.
That was tried. That wasn't anything Hogan did. McMahon and Cyndi Lauper's then boyfriend, fiance David, whatever his name was, got him to come and bodyguard Cyndi Lauper at a number of events, the Grammys and the Billboards, before WrestleMania 1 itself.
Right, but Hogan was the key tie-in to have him versus Piper in the main event.
Remember, Vince wouldn't have gone. Vince was going to go with Snuka as his national top face, and then the whole Nancy Argentino thing happened, and Snuka was like quietly, the last thing he did before returning years later was just coming and seconding out Mr. T and Hogan for WrestleMania. And then he was out, but he was supposed to have been the guy, the go-to lead guy. He was the most over guy in the company for several years. And then, the allegations of him killing his mistress occurred, and that was the end of Snuka. And had Backlund agreed to do what Vince had told him, to do, Vince Jr., etc., which Vince Sr. didn't like. I don't know if that's what killed him, because that was a strange death out of the blue, hearing Vince Sr. died and left the company, or Vince Jr. had angled for it, allegedly. Everything prefaced by...
But Evan, I want to know what your thoughts are of when Hogan won the title. You were there, right?
I wasn't at that particular match, but I was there during that era, and I did not like when Hogan would beat a Greg Valentine in 8 minutes with the same leg drop, and basically, diminish some of these guys who were far superior wrestlers. And the Piper heel era with Orndorff, with Snuka, with Orton, I enjoyed that for the most part, because you were still getting those quote unquote old school kind of matches, Tito Santana and Greg Valentine, et cetera, so on. But within 2 or 3 years, by 86, 87, it was a circus. It was a kiddie show for the most part. And at that point, I was going to the NWA in Philly every month, and I barely went to WWF at that point. And in the past 35 or so years, almost 40 years, if I've gone to a WWE card 24 times, it's a lot. Since Hogan won the belt, I just really lost interest. It's not the wrestling that I enjoy. So to me, not to be long-winded, Hogan was the beginning of the end, because it just wasn't the same product. Sure, you had your exceptions. Savage was great, and Kurt Hennig was great, and Bret Hart was great, and Shawn Michaels was great. But to get to that 1 or 2 great matches, you had to sit through hours of vanilla pablum for the most part.
The Typhoon stuff. Oh, God,
yeah. I mean,
there was a lot of brutal stuff, and it was not the stuff that we had enjoyed, the Backlund and Patera and all of that great stuff, or even the Bruno era. But Backlund worked with Koloff. He worked with a lot of great Mass Superstar. You saw that stuff. It was great.
Backlund worked Morocco. He worked Sergeant Slaughter in his prime.
Patera. But let me talk on behalf of my generation, to whom Hulk Hogan was aimed at, and
Go
we
ahead,
ate him
son.
up.
Go ahead, son.
Yes, I mean Hulk Hogan was more or less made to sort of get us into wrestling, and he mainstreamed wrestling in a way that you were never going to get with Bruno Sammartino or Bob Backlund or the Masked Superstar or Don Morocco or Jimmy Snuka. There was something about Hulk Hogan. He was so it at that point. He had been in Rocky III and the Thunderlip stuff. He was the kind of guy that had that mass appeal like Michael Jordan and the marketability of someone like Kobe Bryant to really take wrestling and make it mainstream in a way that it wasn't accepted before. And I love that part of wrestling. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. All right.
Yeah,
how many other wrestlers have been on the cover of Sports Illustrated?
Before, as both a wrestler and then another cover as a boxer, was Danny Hodge, way before Hogan.
Well, I guess
That was interesting. It was a big deal for Hogan on that cover. But here's a guy who's done a lot of manipulating and stuff, and Vince, as a manipulator, he was the guy responsible for all that pop culture stuff. Granted, the movie fell into his lap. Hogan did that, and was upset that Verne didn't put the title on him. That's why he came. When Vince started raiding all of the territories for talent and plucking David Schultz, Jesse Ventura, who returned, Okerlund, and Hogan. That was just from the AWA alone. Yeah, and then everything else, Mid-South and the Carolinas, where he pilfered Steamboat very quickly after, who I think debuted on that WrestleMania 1.
Hogan Piper was great. Hogan Orndorff was great. I even saw Hogan and Harley Race. I don't know if I call it great, but it was, worth seeing. But a lot of it, he would just hulk up and do the leg drop and beat some guy.
The Japan work, the New Japan stuff, that's the stuff. If you really want to see Hogan being forced to work harder with Inoki or, any of the guys, Shoshu or Saito, or even that very first Dome show against Stan Hansen. This was All Japan and New Japan sent a couple of matches, and then WWF primarily had the card. They sent Savage and DiBiase. That was 1990. And then I was the only white guy shooting ringside, because I worked the entire run of WCW magazine ringside for the true first New Japan versus NWA, which was Flair Fujinami, March 21st, 91. But that did follow Hogan in the main event at the Dome. That was the first wrestling show at the Tokyo Dome. Hogan against Stan Hansen, where Hansen was kind of shooting on him a little, and Hogan, because he forced Hogan to work hard. So it's an excellent match, probably Hogan's best match ever. Not saying much, because Hogan was not a Billy Robinson or a Carl Gotch or, a Flair even, but could be carried to passable matches depending, and the Orndorff thing, it was, I think it still holds the record gate in Toronto at Maple Leaf. It was a huge deal.
Hogan Savage, Hogan Orndorff, those were good matches.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I just like to give credit where it's due, but again, to me, that was the beginning of a change that, it's almost like Vince's dad. It was a different product. It was just a different product.
Well, and Hogan was the face of it. He wasn't responsible. He was in that position. He did great at what he was supposed to do, but it was Vince McMahon, the puppet maker behind the scenes, really doing all that stuff and getting the tie-in with MTV, which was tremendous. Or you remember they showed like a vignette, a reel of all the celebrities, Debbie Harry, Danny DeVito, all Andy Warhol, all these people, at the Brawl to Settle It All, whatever it was, that Hogan Piper thing that was on MTV.
I was at that.
That was a big deal, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was there the night that that Piper clocked Lou Albano over the head with the record album or whatever it was. Yeah.
What was leading up to that? I think I missed part of that. I've seen the clocking, but there was something leading up to it in helping turn Albano babyface. What was
He appeared on "Girls Just Want to Have Fun" on Cyndi Lauper's video.
But he'd been feuding with Lauper and bad-mouthing and trashing her on Piper's Pit leading up to Mania, and then there was some kind of change of heart.
Yeah, he got an award. They got nominated for a Grammy, and so he was helping celebrate that with. He turned into a good guy once he found out from Cyndi Lauper.
Piper got pissed off Albano was getting an award and not him, and clocked him over the head.
Right. Yes, exactly. He came in and interrupted that, and that's where, and that was all on MTV. And I tell you, in my high school at that time, that was probably the most talked about event that happened that year. People talking about Piper, because everybody watched MTV at that time. Everybody.
It's true.
So it captured people who were not wrestling fans, but they were like, what the heck is going on here? And that set things up for WrestleMania. And my high school government teacher, who was like a total slacker teacher, was one of my favorite professors, John Thompson. He let me actually do a history report on WrestleMania because I said that this was an event so big, it was going to change the course of history. And in some ways it has. In some ways, you look back on WrestleMania, it has.
I'll tell you, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Oakland Tribune, and the San Jose Mercury covered WrestleMania in San Francisco. It was shown at the Bill Graham. He was that famous promoter.
I was there. I was there for that with my brother.
Okay. Well, if you go look at the newspapers, Meltzer and I are sitting front row at the Bill Graham watching it on the screen.
Why didn't you say something?
Interviewed.
Why didn't you say something to me?
We got interviewed jointly together talking about that, how wrestling changed, and we were both a little bit slightly negative, on more, it's going to become more show busy as a result of this. And, but that was funny. We were getting along then in whatever it was, 84. Was it April of 84, March of 84?
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen Vince go with Apache Bull Ramos instead of Hogan. I would have. Yeah, but so
it would have been different had Snuka had it actually happened. Say Jimmy, that hadn't happened with Nancy Argentino, that would have really been quite a bit different. There's a lot of what ifs, but Hogan was the guy, had the right look, was just in the. That's my favorite Rocky movie too, for whatever reason. And I was an extra. I was a ringside photographer for Rocky 2, shot at the LA Sports Arena across the USC where I was going to school. But Rocky 3 with Mr. T and Thunder Lips Hogan, that's still my favorite. I don't know why, but it's sort of like it came out about the same time as the Montalban Khan.
Yeah, Star Trek Wrath of Khan.
Star Trek, whatever year, what that was, and I go, oh
it's
man,
a hell of a summer. It's a hell of a summer for movies.
Fantastic movies, and I loved that Rocky 3. I did. And
so speaking of that, I was doing a Facebook post, and the post was about watching the old WWF MSG cards, and I start this post, and it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer because I keep thinking about it. And suddenly I go, this isn't a Facebook post. This is an article. And what it is, I basically went to 90% of the shows from 1974 to 84. Okay, pretty much every month with rare exception. And as I'm watching it now, and Mike will appreciate this, the show comes on, the camera pans, there's Georgie Ann Macropolis sitting in her ringside seat. And for those who don't know, she was a newsletter editor, and she was like the den mother of professional wrestling. She's been dead 12 years now. There she is sitting in a seat, looking content, looking happy, in her element. Okay. Then the camera zooms down to ringside. There's Mike, There's John Arezzi. There's Napolitano. There's Apter. There's Professor Elliott, the guy who took the clothes back to the, the wrestlers' clothes back to the dressing room. Elliott's gone. There's Georgette Krieger. Do you remember who that was, Mike?
I remember the name. I can't place. Was she also a fan club editor, or what was she?
No, that was the old lady that used to hit the heels. She would hit him with the program, hit him with a pocket.
She wasn't the one that stabbed Mulligan in Boston.
No. She looked like everybody's like grandmother, and she would hit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mary, the most famous Hat Pin Mary was in New York, but remember we had the chicken lady at the Olympic Auditorium?
Exactly. So Georgette Krieger was born 1899. And there she is. There she is at the Garden. And as I watch these shows, I just go, S.D. Jones is dead. Baron Ciclune is dead. The referee is dead. Monsoon's calling the show. He's dead. And the piece is not all grim. It's about what these memories mean to me. And as I'm watching it on my living room couch, I feel like I'm still sitting in that $6 seat, slightly elevated over ringside, with my dad who's gone and his best buddy who's gone, and I'm older than my dad was when he took me there. And you realize 40 or 50 years have gone by. And these are some of your greatest childhood memories and teenage memories. And so as I wrote the piece, it just became more and more emotional. And, I think it's one of the best wrestling pieces I've ever written. And not that I need to hype it. It's not like I'm going to get rich off of it.
That's saying something, because you penned a lot of great article.
Thank you. So it's going to be out this week, Pro Wrestling Stories. And JP Zucker is a great editor because he's okay with it. It doesn't have to be a bombardment of information, which a lot of wrestling writing is. When wrestling fans mistake great writing for a lot of information, okay? And there's a big difference. And man, I'll tell you, when you look back at your childhood and your uncle, aunt, grandmother, grandfather, father, mother, whoever took you to that basketball game, that football game, that wrestling match, whatever the case may be, and some of them are gone now. You guys just lost parents. J.P. Zucker lost his mother and father 6 weeks apart in 2021. And you start to think back and you go, sitting at that wrestling match with my dad was one of the best nights of my life, And so, rather than review the card, I wrote a piece on what these nights meant to me and what those shows meant to me. And for the wrestling fans whose eyes are rolling in their head because feelings are weakness in 2022, perceived by some. Let me end with this. I also wrote that from the perspective of young fans, I've had fans tell me all that wrestling in the 1970s was boring. It was boring because they don't get it.
Not then it wasn't.
No, they don't get it. And I said, yeah, you had matches like Ivan Putski against Baron von Raschke in a 12-minute headlock, and it could get boring. But let me tell you, a Don Morocco, a Ken Patera, a prime Sergeant Slaughter, that was not boring.
Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens.
Patterson, that was not
the Bruiser, and yeah, that's true.
Before we close, who were some guys you saw? You saw Pat probably against Slaughter in that boot camp match, right, Ed?
I saw Patterson and Backlund at the Garden. I saw Patterson and Slaughter at the Garden. Patterson and Mosca. Patterson wrestled everybody. He was He was great. The guy was great, heel or face. And Patterson and Backlund went four matches.
The only wrestling radio show Pat ever did, remember I brought him on Legends. He did that as a favor because we went back so far. And he was pretty damn incredible. And to see him not only leave San Francisco, because Shire fired him, long story, but when he eventually got via AWA and Florida up north, and a long time in New Japan as well, but when he got there to Vince, becomes Vince number 2, and then he brings his San Francisco crew one by one, Peter Mavia, Morocco,
Ray Stevens.
Yeah, that was what Pat said. He was throwing Ray a bone. He knew Ray was on his last legs as a wrestler, a worker. He'd had enough motorcycle accidents. He wasn't the same Ray Stevens, but he still had that aura. And he brought in like a whole slew of guys, and it was a big deal. He brought Fuji had heat apparently with Vince Sr., but Pat was able to get him back, and that was when they paired him at that point, I think 81 with Masa Saito, Mr. Saito, instead of Toru Tanaka, his longtime partner.
Guys, we're about out of time for this week's show, so we'll have to reminisce more next week on various topics. But I did like what Evan was saying, and we should definitely look forward to that Pro Wrestling Stories article. You should post it on our Facebook site, and some of our listeners should definitely check out your article when it's ready to read.
Yeah,
we can post stuff on this show's Facebook site. I'm going to go.
Yeah, you should try checking it out sometime on Facebook.
Put some pictures in or whatever.
Year and a half. Yeah.
What Evan was talking about is what AEW guys now talk about as a great experience. But Evan, it was years and years and years. It wasn't just a brand new promotion. Years of Evan's, the great moments of his life, spending time with his father, seeing his friends. It was a whole event, exciting event, which is thankfully, people are finding that now with AEW and other promotions. And when New Japan starts returning back, when it's safe to have more shows around the U.S., experiences. That's what wrestling is.
Yes, guys. All right. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Combate Kurosai.